Hello class and welcome to Mr. Brandis' third podcast on evolution. In this podcast we're going to be discussing microevolution and the mechanisms of microevolution, including genetic drift, gene flow, mutations, and natural selection. To understand microevolution you first have to understand what a gene pool is. And a gene pool is all of the alleles in all of the individuals that make up a population. Microevolution is evolution at its smallest point, and it is literally a change in the allele frequency from generation to generation. There are several mechanisms for microevolution. The Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium is not a mechanism, and so if something is evolving, that means it's outside of the Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium, and therefore is evolving. So, causes are genetic drift, in which there is the bottleneck effect and the founder effect, also called immigration. Gene flow is another cause of microevolution, as are mutations, which are not necessarily likely to occur because it is very randomized, and in order for those individuals to really pass on that gene, it must happen in the gamete. Either that or multiple people have to have that mutation. Natural selection is the final mechanism, and it's probably one of the most important mechanisms of microevolution as well. Genetic drift, which is our first mechanism of microevolution, is a change in the gene pool of a population due to random chance. So here we see a group of flowers, a field of flowers, and we can see that some of them are orange and some are white. And the orange ones are dominant, so they can be big R, or they could be a heterozygote as well. And the white flowers are homozygous recessive. Based on random pollination, this field of flowers may change over time. Perhaps the bees like the color of the purple flowers. Those flowers that are getting pollinated are only the orange ones, and therefore eventually we have a field of all orange flowers. Causes of genetic drift can be the founder effect or the bottleneck effect. The founder effect is when a few individuals colonize an isolated place, like a lake or stream or some form of new habitat. The smaller the colony, the less genetic makeup it will represent in the gene pool of the larger population from which the colonists came from. The bottleneck effect is by random chance, certain alleles may be represented more frequently than others among the survivors of a disaster. So if the world were to flood tomorrow and some of the individuals that have webbed fingers or feet were better apt at swimming, they would more than likely be the survivors, and those would be the only individuals reproducing, and therefore everyone in the future, if given a giant flood on the earth, would have webbed fingers and feet. The bottleneck effect occurs when there's some sort of natural disaster, and the founder effect occurs when there's only a few individuals that cross over into a new untapped territory. And so either of those, your gene pool will be very limited in terms of its diversity. Another mechanism for microevolution is gene flow, and gene flow is essentially the exchange of genes between populations. So here we see a population of brown beetles, and one of them has immigrated over to the green beetles population, and if they are able to mate, then they will change up that green beetle's gene pool. So it's when new genes come in from an outside space. Mutations are another cause for microevolution, and a mutation is a change in an organism's DNA, and if a mutation is carried by a gamete, the mutation enters the population's gene pool. This is rare, however, this does occur. For example, in certain places in Africa, here you see with the black dots, you can see that that is an area with malaria. And malaria attacks normal red blood cells, like this one right over here, the good donut shape. And what happens is the individual won't live long enough to reproduce. And in those areas, malaria runs rampant. Now, a ways back, individuals had a mutation to cause sickle cell anemia, which basically means that their nice donut-shaped red blood cells, due to a mutation, changed into this sickle shape that you see over here to the bottom left. The malaria parasite does not recognize that sickle cell shape. And so what you can see is an increase in population of individuals with sickle cell anemia within the area of malaria-ridden space. And so these individuals are the only ones able to reproduce because individuals with malaria die off before they can even have children. And so therefore, that causes a change in that gene pool. Natural selection is one of the final mechanisms for microevolution. And natural selection is a blend of chance and sorting. The chance stems from the mutations and the sexual recombination of alleles. These random events produce genetic variation in a population. Sorting, which is not random, is accomplished by differences in reproductive successes among members of the varying population. And in order to repopulate, you have to be fit. And fitness is a contribution that an individual makes to the gene pool of the next generation compared to the contributions of other individuals. Essentially, this is the statement that kind of makes you think survival of the fittest. And so if we take a look at a certain group of moths, here you can see barely outlined is one type of moth that is very well blended into its surroundings, and another type of moth that is not so much. If you were a bird, you would be more likely to eat this darker moth on this type of a background because it would be easier to see. And so the moth that is more camouflaged will more than likely not be eaten and therefore reproduce. So that moth is considered to be more fit. Sexual selection, which is a form of natural selection, in which individuals with certain characteristics are more likely than other individuals to obtain mates. And you see this all of the time in the big jungles in the Amazon. You see a lot of birds that put on very beautiful displays in order to attract a mate. And that's what sexual selection is. The nicer the song or the prettier the bird, the more likely they are to mate with a female and therefore carry on their genes. So to give you a few examples of the mechanisms of microevolution, I have a couple of questions for you. And the first question is, the fossil remains of pygmy mammoths have been found on Santa Rosa and San Miguel Islands off the coast of California. This population of pygmy mammoths is descended from a population of mammoths of normal size. Dwarfing is common in islands populations and is not the result of chance events. What mechanism do you think best accounts for the decrease in mammoth size on these islands? Is it gene flow, genetic drift, or natural selection? And the key point here is the statement, quote, is not the result of chance events. And don't forget, these are non-random. If we go all the way back to talking about natural selection, sorting, which is not random, there's your key word, is accomplished by the differences in reproductive success among members of the varying population, which is why the answer to this question would be natural selection. Another test for the mechanisms of microevolution that I have for you is 4 moose were taken from the Canadian mainland to Newfoundland in 1904. These 2 males and 2 females rapidly formed a large population of moose that now flourishes in Newfoundland. Which mechanism is most likely to have contributed to the genetic differences between the mainland and Newfoundland moose? Is it gene flow, founder effect, or novel mutations? And in this case, we're taking a small group of moose and putting them on a distant island. And if you thought founder effect was the correct answer, you are indeed correct. Because don't forget, the founder effect is a form of genetic drift that is when a few individuals colonize an isolated island, lake, or some other new habitat, and their genetic makeup will represent the gene pool of their future population. So those 4 moose and all of their genes are going to be the only genes found in that one area. And that's why founder effect is the correct answer. So that's all from me. Thank you very much for listening. As always, please rewatch this and take notes on it. If you have any questions, please write those down and bring them to class. Aside from that, have a wonderful day.